We'll begin in Design Studio. What we see here is a WebSphere TX project. In the project, I have some maps. The map that we're going to be looking at today converts edifact data into a flat file format. Let's have a look at this map, which is called Orders to Flat PO. Within this map, we see one executable map. The map has one input card and one output card, and you can see them shown here in the main editor pane. If we look closer at the input card, we can see that it's bound to an edifact type tree. The output card is bound to an arbitrary type tree that represents some flat sort of purchase order. Let's have a closer look at that. So what we have here is a structure. It's a hierarchical structure, and we basically have a number of fields. The format is completely arbitrary. It's something which has just been made up for the purposes of this example. The purpose of the map is to convert from the edifact data to the purchase order. So, the first thing that we do when we are given a map like this is we try and run it. And in order to do that, we must first build it. So now the map is ready to run, and we can execute it right here on the computer where Design Studio is running by clicking on the Run icon. And immediately we see a problem. The problem says that the fail function aborted the map. Well, if we look within the map, we can see that the fail function is on this rule. It's in the EDI to PO functional map. So if we navigate there, we can find the rule, which is questionable. It's the PO number field rule. Here it is. And immediately we can see the problem. The problem is this map is trying to talk to Sterling to put correlations and arbitrary data into the underlying database within Sterling. Since we're not running on Sterling, we're running on Design Studio on a PC, this is not going to work. So we can take out that rule and end up with a map that looks similar but slightly different. Here we see that the rule has been commented out. We're just putting some field into that value. So let's try this again. We'll build the map, we'll run it, and it says it completed successfully. So let's have a look at what this map produced. We can see here the input and the output cards. And by viewing them, we see that we started with edifact, and we ended up with a flat file proprietary format. And as you see, all the data has been mapped. So how do we run this map on Sterling Integrator? Well, there's a number of ways to do that. You'll notice when I choose to run this map, I'm presented with a couple of options down here. Run on Sterling B2B Integrator and deploy to Sterling B2B Integrator. These options require a Sterling server that we can connect to. And that's configured in the preferences for Transformation Extender. We see here a new section has been added in the 8.4 release called Sterling B2B Integrator. I'm prompted for the host name, the port, the username, the password, and the platform of the server which is hosting Sterling B2B Integrator. So now, let's try this again. If I run this strip down map on Sterling, we can see that a web service call is made. The web service call returns and it produces the same output data as was produced when we ran the map in Design Studio. So let's have another look at the map that attempts to write to process data and set correlations. This is the one, and here's the rule. The first rule is actually putting something into process data, and the second one is setting a correlation. The correlation is PO_num, and it's setting the value to the document message number that came from the input edifact document. So let's try running this on the Sterling server. And immediately we can see that it was successful. The data has been transformed, and we can verify that by looking at the output data. But this time, there was no complaint about the rules that tried to write to process data and set correlations. So we can verify that this map has actually executed by logging on to the Sterling dashboard. By looking in the Business Process Monitor, we can search for correlations. And we see here that two correlations have indeed been set. PO_num has been set for the two individual transactions which were in the edifact data. So, how do we run this map in a Sterling B2B Integrator business process? Well, the first thing we need to do is we need to deploy the map to the Sterling B2B repository. So you'll notice that there's a new menu item, Deploy to Sterling B2B Integrator. By clicking on this, the map is compiled and deployed via web services to the Sterling map repository. We can verify this by looking in the map repository to see if the map is there. And indeed, there it is. We can now use this map in the translation service that's built into Sterling's business process engine. So let's create a new business process. We start with BPML start and end activities, and between them we'll put in a translation service. Wire the whole lot together and then open the configuration for the translation service itself. There's really only one thing that we need to configure here, and that is the map that we want to run. Now, the translation service looks into the Sterling map repository and lists all of the maps which are available to be used. Of course, we've checked in the map that we were working on, and so that map appears in the drop-down list, and we can select it, and now this translation service is ready to run it. Validate and save. And now we can go to the Sterling dashboard and create a new process definition. Let's call this demo translation. We point to the business process that we just created in the graphical process modeler. Demo of the translation service. And now we have a business process which is capable of running that map via the translation service. Let's have a look at this. Here it is. And we can execute this from the Sterling dashboard by pointing it to an input file. So here's our Edifact data, and off it goes. So now we see that the data has in fact been transformed into the flat file format. So back to Design Studio. Imagine if we had a map that was more complex than the kind of map that you would find in a Sterling repository. One such map might be one that has multiple cards. So what we have here is basically the same map, but this time the map has two output cards. The first card is, of course, our flat file purchase order. The second card has been added to provide a summary counting how many individual transactions there were in the Edifact document. So, when we build and run this map in Design Studio, of course choosing to run it on the Sterling B2B server because of the correlations and the process data, we see that the map completes successfully, but this time the map has produced two outputs. Here they are. The first output is, of course, the transformed data. Nothing has happened there that's different. But the second output card tells us that there were two purchase orders inside this Edifact document. Now, running this map inside the translation service is going to be problematic. The reason for that is that the translation service only understands the concept of one output card. So, let's deploy this. And then we'll rerun this business process. So once again, we'll give it the same Edifact data. Off it goes. But this time, the output document which is produced contains the summary only. There doesn't seem to be a way to get at the translated purchase order. So, fortunately, there is a new service which is called the WebSphere TX service. So let's make a new business process. Again, we'll put a start and an end around it. But this time, instead of the translation service, let's choose the WTX map service. We connect it all up, and then we configure the WTX service. Again, we're going to be asked for the map name. We know what it is. But this time, we're going to have to tell the service which cards are going to read and write from which pieces of process data. It looks like this. We know this map only has one input card, and this input card is going to read the primary document. But we know the map has two output cards. The first output card is the output data. Let's call this card 1. The second output card is the summary. Let's call this summary. Now, when we validate and save, we end up with a new business process. So let's go and check this in using the Business Process Manager. We'll call this Demo WTX. We'll browse for the business process that we created in the graphical process modeler. Testing the WTX map service. Okay, let's go and run this map, and we'll pass in the same input document as before, the edifact message. Now this time, we see that there are two documents that are being produced. The primary document is still the edifact message. On card 1, we see the translated or transformed purchase order. And on card 2, we see the summary. Okay, let's see what happens if we send some bad data across. We'll start in Design Studio. So instead of pointing at some good data, let's point at some bad data. We'll build this map, and then we'll run it on the Sterling B2B Integrator. And what we see here is errors. There's problems. This map cannot continue. The reason this map cannot continue is because there's an edifact transaction in here, which is nonsense. If we try and run this data through the business process, immediately we see problems. We do get a status report, and the status report does tell you what the problem was. If you're familiar with WebSphere TX audit logs, you could probably piece your way through this and find out what the problem was. Of course, the reason that you would want to do that is that you would like to send an acknowledgement back to the person who sent you that edifact message to inform them that there was a problem and what it was, so that they can correct the problem and hopefully resubmit it. Well, fortunately, this is something which Sterling is particularly good at. Sterling offers X12 and edifact de-envelope services, which offer compliance check capabilities, which can be used to build control messages and deal with good and bad data. With this new release, you can use the compliance check capabilities out of the WebSphere TX industry packs within the Sterling de-envelope services. So let's have a look at that. We'll start with some envelopes. So here's a couple of envelopes which have been set up. Let's look at the UNB UNZ one first. So what we see here is an option to use the WTX compliance checker. And it's been set to yes. What this means is that you've chosen to run a compliance check against the data as it comes in, but you've chosen to delegate it to the compliance check map, which ships with the WebSphere TX pack for Edifact. If we look in the UNH, UNT envelope, we see here there's an option to specify the map that you want to run for the translation. So, if we wrap these up in a business process, we end up with something which will receive the document, compliance check it, and then transform only the good data. The bad data will be sent someplace else, and a control message will be generated to be sent back to the person who originally sent you the message to inform them of what happened. So let's try this with some bad data. So immediately we see errors and so forth. Let's look at what happened. So this time we have an acknowledgement. The acknowledgement tells us that there was a problem. The bad data has been rejected. You can see here this is in fact the invalid transaction. But the good data has been transformed into the flat file format. Only the good data. Let's run this again with perfectly good data. So this time things went a lot smoother. We see here that the acknowledgement says that there were 2 orders and they were both fine. And of course, this time all of the data has been transformed into the flat file purchase order.